Alrighty. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here today on this Tuesday. What are we at? May 28th, 2024. So thank you everyone for being here, and really excited to jump into this conversation with a new friend of mine, Loren Lockman. And so I've been following Loren for a couple of years now and have really enjoyed and have a lot of respect for his way of approaching health in this very simple manner, because the truth is always simple. The lie is complex. The truth is simple. So unraveling this complex lie and getting back to the simplicity of who we are is quite the journey. But when we have others to go along in this path to sort of help guide along the way, it certainly helps make things a little bit easier. So I really appreciated Loren for his work in introducing fasting to a wider audience and bringing this simplicity to us in this way of thinking. So yeah, appreciate you for being here, Loren, and yeah, excited to jump into the conversation today on fasting and what that can truly bring to us.
Well, thank you, Justin. It's a pleasure to be here with you. It's been great getting to know you over the last week or so. And I'm always happy to talk about this subject with anybody interested.
Yeah, it's one that really can't be talked about enough. And, it's something we have all these ideas about health really pushed onto us by organized society, that we have to focus on these different intricacies of nutrition and these convoluted, complicated methods of going to doctors and prescribing all these different methods and diagnosing us with all these fancy, scary sounding names, which all just send us into a world of confusion and take us away from who we truly are, which is we're biologically made to thrive. Exactly. Until we start getting in our own way. So yeah, I would love to just jump into the topic of maybe have a little introduction on your story and how you got into this space, and yeah, what brought you to here where we are now.
Yeah, sure. It's probably a relatively common story. Obviously the specifics are a little different, but generally, what happens, I think, to many people who wind up in a profession where they're attempting to help other people is they wind up needing that help themselves. And what happened to me was I graduated from college. Within about 6 months, found myself very ill. And at the time, I grew up on the East Coast, outside of Washington, D.C. All I knew there was conventional medicine, allopathic medicine. And so I went to a doctor. I got worse over the next 12 months, gave up on the doctor and found another one. Went through the same experience, getting worse with medications over the next year. Tried one more doctor. A year later, exasperated. I mean, I was getting worse all the time, doing exactly what they were telling me to do. And it finally occurred to me that they didn't really know what they were talking about. There's the coaster. Give that just a minute maybe to pass.
Just giving a little bit of gratitude for the words that you're sharing.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, what occurred to me was that, they really were bound up in a system. I mean, I think a lot of good people who really believe in what they're doing and want to help as many people as possible, but they've been brought up in a system that provides toxic substances to heal the body. And I hope it's obvious, self-evident to people listening, but we're never going to get healthier by consuming toxic substances. They can't heal the body. In fact, healing is a biological process, something it took me a little while to figure out. But after 3 years of medical care, I thought, okay, and I was the sickest person I knew. I was the youngest officer of the second largest commercial real estate company in Washington, D.C. And I bought a house 10, 12 blocks from the office so I could get up at 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the morning and still make it to the office by 9. And, I spent most of my time in bed. I could barely do anything for 3 years. I felt terrible all the time. Anything I ate made me feel worse. And again, this was many years ago. I was 23 at the time, and I turned 63 a couple weeks ago. So this was literally 40 years ago. And back then, very few doctors, even now, today, there are some who don't believe that chronic fatigue syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome, or candida are real. They back then, they told me it was just in my head. And so I knew it wasn't in my head. I mean, many people, probably many listening, have had a similar experience. And, it's incredibly frustrating to have someone that you trust telling you that what you're dealing with isn't real. It doesn't exist. And so I finally decided, okay, these guys have no idea what they're talking about. They're not going to be able, and this doesn't, again, I'm not suggesting that doctors are bad people, but the system doesn't actually create health. Even when people think they're healthy, what occurred to me only later was, okay, suppressing symptoms not only doesn't make us healthier, it actually makes us less healthy, because the symptoms are evidence the body's cleansing and healing. And so the last thing we want to do is suppress the symptoms. I'm all about letting the body do what it needs to do. If I have a fever, unless that fever is 104 degrees, I'm not going to do anything. Okay, I'm not going to do anything at all to suppress any symptoms, because I want my body, which is virtually infinitely intelligent, to be able to do what it needs to do. And so, I think there's a few things that I share with clients when we first start talking that I think are important for anyone listening to understand. I've already said the first one, and that is that healing is a biological process. There's a story you may have heard me share before, Justin. I was in Belfast, Ireland, teaching a seminar. And I said to the group, there's only one thing on this planet that can heal your body. And a very hopeful voice from the back of the room said, you? No, it's not me. I can't heal you. Nobody can heal you. Okay, no thing can heal you. And I want to be really clear about this. And I know, this is going to push some people's buttons, but drugs can't heal you. Drugs came from herbs originally. Herbs can't heal you. Substances can't heal you, because only the body, the organism, can heal itself. And so ultimately, when I realized this, I realized every species on the planet, your cat or dog, if it gets sick enough, okay, Kali will lay down. Has this ever happened? She'll lay down and stop eating, refuse to eat. You can put food right in front of her and she won't touch it, because every other species instinctively knows that if they need to heal, the last thing they want to do is take in food, which takes so much of the body's energy to process. Now, many people say, I hear this literally all the time, yeah, but don't you need nutrients to heal? No, we have what we need in the body. We don't need nutrients right now. Of course, on an ongoing basis, yes, I think we need nutrients. We definitely need energy coming in. But do we need it today, next week, a month from now? Maybe not. Okay. In fact, every other species fast to heal the body. And I learned something, again, I'm sure everybody listening probably knows who Hippocrates was, right? That guy down in Florida. And knows his probably his most famous quote, let your food be your medicine your food. Most people don't know that his next words were, but to feed yourself when you're already sick is to feed your sickness. Fasting is what doctors used to prescribe for people all the time. They were students of the natural world, right? That's the scientific method, is simply a intention, the intention of understanding nature, understanding what's happening around us. And when you're studying nature, you notice, oh, look, these animals aren't eating anything. Okay, and they're not just not eating anything, they're also not moving, right? It's funny because I had a conversation with somebody just the other day. You were there, actually, with a gentleman who said, oh, yeah, I've done some fasting as long as 21 days. I said, did you stay active? He's like, oh, yeah, I have tons of energy. I'm busy and active. I'm like, okay, but you're not really getting much benefit that way. Because if we're not conserving the body's energy, how can the body, and the whole point, I think, is to conserve the body's energy so that energy is available to cleanse and heal. So if you're being busy and active in the absence of fuel coming in, all the energy you have is going towards doing those things. And again, this is why the dog or the cat doesn't move when fasting, doesn't do anything it doesn't need to do. This, I think, is much more difficult for us than it is for cats and dogs, because maybe I'm wrong, and maybe you can tell me if you think I'm wrong, but I doubt Kali is suppressing her emotions every day. And yet most people have done every day, right? And so, when we get quiet and still enough, those suppressed emotions begin bubbling up to the surface. And this is what makes it hard for people to simply be still, right? Very, very few of us have much experience doing nothing. But that's really what we should be doing.
Well, I love how you mentioned the second part of that Hippocrates quote. If you're feeding your sickness, or if you're consuming, you're feeding your sickness, which is so profound, and really all comes back to this discussion of stillness and the perfection within our body. Just really highlights the beauty of this intelligent design and this system that has been created for us, where we don't need anything external to us. And really all we have to do is to peel away these layers that are keeping ourselves from ourselves, keeping us away from that stillness, keeping us away from that simplicity. It's so profound and just really indicates the level of love that's imbued within the system. And all we have to do is just let it be.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, so I think we covered it. I don't think there's anything else to say, really.
Yeah, we could just close out here with a little soundbite. That'd be great. Yeah, so I'd love to go into just maybe talking a little bit more about what led you to establishing your retreat center, Tanglewood, and maybe go deeper into the protocol that you guys do there. I think there's something that is a curiosity of people who maybe have never embarked upon a fast before, are intimidated by the idea of it. So how does that look? And what would you suggest for people in that space?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll start where you did. The first question: Why does Tanglewood exist? At the time I began my own fasting journey, there was no internet, or I guess the military had the internet, but the rest of us didn't. And so, it was a different world than it was today. We had a search engine back then. It was called the Yellow Pages. And if you looked in it, there was nothing about fasting. And I didn't know there were places you could fast. My first mentor, my introduction to the subject, was Professor Arnold Ehret, who at that point had been dead for 50, 55 years, something like that. He wasn't of much help to me. I had the book, but that was it. I couldn't call him, or he wasn't answering anyway. And so I later realized that there were places that one could go to fast. But when I looked at them, they all seemed very clinical to me. Exactly the kind of place I would not personally want to spend 3 or 4 weeks or more. I wanted to be in nature. And it's interesting because that was just something like intuitively. I mean, I've always felt at home really only in nature. And as you know, I live in nature now on a lot of acreage in the jungle, and it's amazing. I like it that way. It's a little weird for me here, being in this busy place where I can hear there's another train coming. I can hear the traffic. I can hear my next door neighbors. It's a little strange being here temporarily. So I looked around at what was out there and thought, yeah, I think I could do a much better job than this. I think I could create something that gives me that sense of nature. And today there's actually some good science that actually demonstrates the importance of nature. Studies that show that if you take 2 patients, one who's got a view from his hospital bed of a tree through a window, just being able to see a tree through the window means you heal 15 to 20% faster than if you can't see the tree. And I don't think people sitting in a hospital with the view of a tree really feel like they're ensconced in nature, right? But just that view is enough. At Tanglewood, one is completely ensconced in nature. It's all around us. We're part of it. Our main living area is actually a covered patio. There's no walls on two sides. It's open to the garden, and we have 35 species of hummingbirds. I think I photographed at least 70 species of butterflies. We have flocks of parrots and parakeets, and sitting there, you can't help but feel like you're connected to all of it. And that's important. I mean, for me, that's what spirituality is. It's knowing and recognizing that connection that I have with everything around me, including you and including listeners and including the table that I'm leaning on and everything else. But I think especially important to reconnect to the energy and the vibration of nature, which living in the normal material world takes us away from. We're removed from it. So that's, for me, that's really the most important piece.
Yeah, beautifully said. I mean, it's so true that just recognizing how we came into this physical reality. We came through the mother. She's the one who birthed us and brought us into this space. So if we are going to sort of redo our fallen state and come back into wholeness, then we have to come back to our roots and reconnect with her in order to connect with him, which is our Heavenly Father. So our earthly mother is essential that we connect with her in order to bring us to this higher realm and this higher space. So there's no accident that you felt called to that. And I think that we'll see a resurgence of this, knowing that we do have to connect with our earth in order to truly find any semblance of peace within. It's essential.
I certainly hope so. So what happens at Tanglewood? I mean, our clients, first of all, it's amazing. It's incredible because it's a very international community. At any given time, we'll have around 30 clients fasting, and it's not unusual to have anywhere between 8 and as many as 15 different countries represented. Our clients have come from 149 countries so far. Virtually every country in Europe, virtually every country in the Americas. We might be missing one or two. Quite a few countries in Asia. We're missing some countries in Asia and quite a few countries in Africa. People who haven't come to us, but you have this incredible melting pot of people from all over the planet who are all there for the same reason. So you have this incredibly supportive community of like-minded people. And I want to brag on our clients a little bit because so many people, I'm constantly shocked and amazed by how little logic most people seem to possess and how poorly people seem to be able to understand fairly basic things. And the people who come to us are clearly quite a bit more intelligent than the average person. They're people who are willing to take a significant degree of responsibility, which I think is critically important. I mean, I believe in taking responsibility for everything because I believe ultimately we are at cause. I am the creator in my life, and I'm not saying there's not a larger creator. I'm saying I'm part of that energy, something that every one of the most spiritually advanced people, at least that we're aware of, Jesus and Buddha and Lao Tzu and Muhammad, all said to their followers, each of you is exactly as I am. We're the same. Okay, so I think it's critically important that we take responsibility, and people do that. So what happens at Tanglewood is that each morning people wake up and they come from their rooms, most of which are individual cottages. We have one building with 4 rooms in it, and all the rest of the rooms. We have one disabled access room in the main building, and then all of the other rooms are in individual buildings. And people come from their rooms to the main office to get weighed. We weigh them each day with a pretty sophisticated bioimpedance device that allows us to measure muscle mass, fat mass, and the amount of water in the body. And then they rest for about 30 minutes or more, until the nurse or physician's assistant can get to them to measure blood pressure, pulse, temperature, blood oxygen saturation, blood sugar. I think that's everything. And that happens every day. And once they've had everything measured, we see them. And when I say we, there's a doctor on staff who I'm currently training. Up until now, I've seen everybody who's fasted at Tanglewood, but, and this is, we're 28 and a half, not quite 28 and a half, but over 28 years in now. We've taken close to 11,000 people through fasts averaging 26 days. And I don't know that we've clarified, but when we're talking about fasting here, we're talking about water only fasting. You know, some people think of juices. Someone told me they were on a fast the other day. In fact, I remember years ago, I was teaching an event, and back then I was fasting. This was 30 plus years ago. I would fast for a few days every quarter. And this just happened to fall. The two things coincided. And fasting that long for me was as it is today, is no big deal at all. And so I'm teaching this event, and at the lunch break, I go and sit at a table, and someone comes and says, "May I sit down?" I said, "Yeah, sure." He said, "Where's your lunch?" I said, "Well, I'm not eating, I'm fasting." He said, "Well, I'm fasting too." And he pulled out a bag with apples and oranges in it, started to eat them. I said, I thought you said you were fasting." He said, "Yeah, when I fast, I just eat fruit." And I said, "Oh, I always fast." And in that case, I'm always fasting. But you know, fasting really means the complete abstinence from calories and nutriment. And you know, it's interesting. That's the classical definition. Today, there are people that say that, well, it's okay to drink coffee or tea or to, you know, various other things that you can consume because they don't take you out of ketosis. And I'm thinking, yeah, but you're not fasting. And the difference is there's actually a state which I call fasting physiology, where the rules change. Things are different. You know, it's interesting. I have a client who is on day 3 of refeeding after a 29-day fast. And for about a week, her temperature was what any doctor in the world would say is hypothermic. You need to get to the hospital. And yet she was fine. We have clients all the time whose blood sugar is low enough that any doctor in the world would say immediately go to the emergency room, or at least eat something, you know, take some sugar in. These people are fine. It's because we're in a different physiological state when we're fasting, and we have to understand that. So, you know, the way I practice fasting at Tanglewood is that strict definition. We don't give people electrolytes. Our competitors do. People are not actually fasting. And it's the reason why we see quite a few people every year who went somewhere else, didn't get the results they wanted, and wound up coming to us. What we do is quite different. And honestly, maybe a little bit riskier in the way that if you want to climb the highest mountains, you have to take some risks. You know, you can't get to the highest peak of health if you're not willing to allow your body to do what it needs to do. They want to prevent people from having difficult symptoms, but difficult symptoms are necessary. And the next piece, I started out by saying, you know, there's some things that I share with everybody. The first piece is healing is a biological process. The second piece, and it's amazing to me, I think, how many people really don't understand this. Symptoms are evidence the body's cleansing and healing. They're not the problem. I said that in passing, but I think it's important to really repeat it, because it's so important to understand. People say to me, "Yeah, but I've got this going on. What can you do about it?" Like, we're not going to do anything about it. We don't want to suppress the symptoms. We don't want to interfere with your body's processes. In fact, it's interesting, Justin, about 3 months ago, I was at a client's house. I was staying there, and I was doing this little construction project for her, just a gift. She'd been very generous, allowing me to stay there as I was traveling. And so I built this little thing for her. And it was in the garage. And I walked into the garage one night. I have a call every night. Back then it was at 8 o'clock with people in Asia that are fasting with me remotely. And so after the call, I walked in. It had been a long day. My first call is early in the morning every day. And I walked in there and I had my phone in front of my face because I was reading a message on it. There's one step down into the garage. I missed it that night. And I fell and I landed on my right wrist. And by the next morning, it had blown up like a balloon. I could barely move my hand, and there was a tremendous amount of pain with any movement. And she said, "Do you want to put ice on that?" And I said, "Absolutely not." Okay, my virtually infinitely intelligent body created this swelling on purpose. Okay, the swelling occurs because my body is bringing blood and lymph to the area. I can constrict my blood and lymph vessels so the swelling goes down. There'll be less inflammation and it won't hurt as much, but it's not going to heal as quickly that way. So I leave it alone. I stopped eating. I fasted for a week so my body could heal it. And it was amazing. It healed completely and I was right back to work. It's funny because I met someone recently who had a similar accident and it took them a long time to heal, to be able to use that hand again. Okay, and so this, the intelligence of the body is incredible. I like to think I'm pretty smart, but I'm an idiot compared to my body with regard to my body's needs. So I don't try to figure out from here what to do, what to eat, any of these things. I try to understand the laws of nature and how they apply to the human body. And that philosophy guides everything that I've done at Tanglewood over the last 28 plus years.
Yeah, that's great. And it really, a huge aspect of that is just the getting the mental part away from that space of trust, truly trusting that the body can handle that. So when we encounter these symptoms that for our entire lives have been told by the medical establishment and told by society, told by worrying parents or whomever, that, you've got to run to the hills and freak out about this or that and cover this up. So you've got that whole weight of society pushing against that inherent trust that your body knows what to do and you're taken care of. So to move back into that space of just allowing whatever it is to happen is huge. So I think that's a great point to draw upon. And yeah, I am curious though. So, obviously you guys are monitoring things consistently throughout the process.
Right.
What would be some factors where you'd say, okay, this has gone a little bit too far. We might need to slow down. We might need to shift, obviously excluding the things that most people might consider as dangerous. What is your level where it's like, this is going too far?
Well, and I should clarify, it's not that, if someone has a low temperature, this woman recently, so 95 degrees, we're talking Fahrenheit, 95 degrees and below is hypothermic. Okay. This woman was at 93.2, I think at one point, something like that. That's quite low. So my first question is, how do you feel? Fine. Are you cold? No. Okay, good. No concerns. With blood sugar, if I see someone whose blood sugar, as you may be aware, in the US, the American Medical Association now says that blood sugar should be between 70 and 100. Okay. I believe it actually should be between 60 and 90. And there are now various countries that have changed in line with what I've been saying for more than 30 years. But we see clients sometimes in the high 20s, 27, 28. Any doctor in the world would say that's an emergency. Okay. And yet these people generally feel fine. And so the difficulty in answering your question is, we have to understand it's situational. I'm not ever doing anything based on just the number. And sometimes the numbers, I remember once we had a client and I thought, okay, I think we might have a bit of an issue here. We will hopefully within the next year be investing in various additional equipment. And one of the things that we're probably going to acquire is the machine that allows us to test blood electrolytes on our own. What we do now is we call a lab and they send a technician up to us, 30, 40-minute drive. They take a blood sample, they drive back to the lab where they test it. Now we have a doctor on site. and a nurse, but they won't test blood unless they draw it themselves. So we can't do that. Now, if we have a machine, we can test it ourselves. So I had a client, I thought, okay, based on what's going on, I think there might be an electrolyte issue here. So we ordered a test. The test comes back so low, I'm looking at this going, yeah, this guy would be dead if this was accurate. There's no way this is right. Right. So no matter what it is, I mean, the first thing is if we see a number, we're talking about the measurements, that's significantly different than what we've seen before, I'm going to double and maybe triple check it to make sure that it's accurate. That's not an equipment malfunction. There's not something else going on. And so the truth is there are relatively few times that we break fasts. That is that people need to stop. It does happen sometimes. Typically what that looks like is someone who becomes so nauseous that they can't get the water down that they need. They're getting dehydrated because they can't drink enough water, or they can't keep water down. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen from time to time. And in fact, the woman I mentioned to you who was hypothermic, and that was almost 4 weeks ago now when that ended, she had planned to do 40 days and made it to day 29. And she wanted to keep going, but she wasn't able to keep water down. And it's been a while since that had happened, but it does happen sometimes. And so there's a case where, we can see, based on interpreting the numbers correctly, we can see that someone's getting dehydrated. And that's going to put them in danger because we can create an issue with electrolytes by drinking too much and too quickly, really, or by not drinking enough. If we take the water in too fast, or if we don't take in enough water, we're going to create an electrolyte imbalance, and that can be quite dangerous. And so, in that case, she had said to me the couple days before, I definitely want to do 40 days, and I said, I get it. And yet, if we get to a point where it's clear that your body needs you to stop, then you want to stop anyway, right? It doesn't make any sense to put yourself in real danger. And so we got to that point where it made sense for her to stop earlier than she had originally planned to. And, and she was okay with it. But it's funny. I mean, even today, she said, it's like she was apologizing. Something like, I'm sorry I failed to do. I'm like, you didn't fail. You did what your body was able to do. Okay, that's all we can do. I mean, there are times when people choose to stop prematurely when they don't need to. And that's unfortunate because it guarantees that they don't get the benefits that they were hoping for in most cases. But yeah, I mean, it's a little bit difficult to answer directly because it really depends on the specifics of each situation.
Yeah, that makes sense. And just having the intuitive guide move through that process.
Right.
Yeah, just on a case by case basis. Yeah, cool. Well, you've talked a little bit about, I think it's always important, and I love the focus on the sipping the water aspect. So could you go a little bit more into just the sort of importance of when we are embarking upon a fast in that way, the importance of sipping and why that's so vital in considering this process?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because many people have this mistaken idea that the body can only handle 2, maybe 3 liters of water a day. Science has actually said that 2 healthy kidneys, and not everyone has 2 healthy kidneys, but the 2 healthy kidneys can process up to 1 liter an hour. Now, I have seen various people early in my career getting in trouble drinking at the rate of 1 liter an hour. And so I ask people to drink no more than half that much. And for those of you from the US, 16 ounces, 500 milliliters, half a liter, is 16 and just a little bit more than 16 and a half ounces, 16 and 3/4 ounces roughly. And so 16 ounces and half a liter is pretty close to the same thing. I speak about them analogously. They're the same. So we're asking people to drink 1 large glass of water, 16-ounce glass, an hour, but slowly over the hour. So if this were 16 ounces, that's an hour, half of that in 30 minutes, a quarter in 15 minutes, et cetera, et cetera. The reason is very simple. Your kidneys are constantly filtering your blood. They never stop. It goes on your entire life. If they ever do stop working, then you need to be connected to a machine, and the outlook isn't very good. And so we want to make sure that the kidneys are able to do their job the way that they need to. If we take water in faster than they can handle it, in fact, if we go back to what I was just saying, the rate at which we can drink it really is the rate at which the kidneys can handle it, can process it, right? So 16 ounces in an hour, 8 ounces in 30 minutes, 4 ounces in 15, 2 ounces in 7.5, 1 ounce every 3 3/4 minutes, half an ounce in a minute and 7/8. That's basically how fast the filters can handle it. If we drink faster than that, what happens is kidneys can't filter it properly, and we're losing electrolytes. Now, there are people listening sometimes who will say, yeah, but I guzzle water all the time. Every day I get up and I drink a liter of water, sometimes 2. I've heard this over and over again. And I understand that. But the average person's eating 5 times a day. Even if you're eating twice a day, you're replacing electrolytes with each meal. Okay? But my average client's going nearly 4 weeks, and some of them go much longer than that. But the average client goes 26 days, just short of 4 weeks, consuming only water. We want to make sure we're not flushing out even a tiny bit more electrolytes than we need to. Okay, now normally I would expect there to be some loss of electrolytes over time. In fact, that's what the research shows. But it's interesting because I have a gentleman who completed his last day, 21st day of a 21-day fast with me today. He starts eating tomorrow. And he's in India. He had his electrolytes. We require everyone to get us electrolyte results, only sodium, potassium, and chloride. Those 3, because those are the 3 that are most critical. If your magnesium or calcium is out of balance, it's not going to be critical for you. But if your sodium, potassium, or chloride is out of balance, there could be some fairly significant, often negative repercussions, like your heart might stop. And that's usually a negative thing. And so we require those. We got those numbers from him. I think he did it late. We asked people for a little bit, but he did it 2 days before he started. And he was getting nervous because he'd always believed that, well, no one should be drinking, more than 2 or 3 liters a day. And I had him drinking 6 liters a day. That was what his body needed. Some people need more than that. So he had his electrolytes tested again just 3 or 4 days ago. And he got me the numbers. And so his electrolytes 18 or 19 days into his fast, and his sodium and chloride levels had gone up, not down. It's not the first time we've seen that. So, it's amazing because many people say, well, you have to take electrolytes or you're putting yourself in danger. And yet I've taken nearly 11,000 people through fasts that are nearly 4 weeks in length on average. And we've never had anybody we've had a few people over time who've gotten into some electrolyte trouble, but no one's ever died from electrolyte issues. No one's ever had a serious consequence. Not to minimize the people who have had issues. It does happen. And I'll tell you a little story. I'm always learning because I had my own experience and had seen the people I started working with. We never had any issues. I never really was too concerned about it until about 5 years ago. And I had a client fasting with me for the second time. The first time she fasted, she did 30 days and there were no problems. The second time, if I remember, it was only 21. It might have been 26, but I think it was only 21 days. And she completed the fast. She began refeeding. She vomited twice on the first or second day of refeeding. Now, normally, someone would have to vomit many times, 5 times a day for 10 days, and then we have a problem, right? She vomited twice. and she wound up being unable to have a conversation. She needed to go to the hospital because her electrolytes were way out of whack. And I thought about that and thought, the only way that could happen, it didn't happen from vomiting twice. They must have been out of whack when she started her fast. They had to have been way out of balance. And so we immediately began requiring every client to get us their electrolytes before they could start. A year later, this same young woman came back to me and said, I want to fast again. I was a little surprised after that experience because she was in the hospital, right? I said, really? She said, yeah. I said, okay. But I want you to get your electrolytes tested, not 4 weeks in advance, which is what I normally ask people. 4 weeks in advance, because if there's an issue, we can correct it before they start. Okay, we have enough time to fix it. Which would typically, if it's sodium or chloride, I would have them drink celery juice for a month, a couple times a day, and then check again shortly before we start. It's almost always going to be fine. So far, if we've been able to get it into a healthy range, there is a negligible possibility. I mean, so far, out of 1,000 or more people, 5 years, 1,500 people, we've seen maybe 2 people have an issue. That's a pretty small percentage, right? 15 people would be 1%. And so it's a pretty small percentage. It's not very likely to be an issue as long as they start okay. She tested her electrolytes 2 months before she wanted to start, and they were way out of whack again. And it was interesting because this is someone who claimed, you never know what someone's actually doing at home. She claimed she was eating exactly the way I encourage people to eat, which, as you know, Justin, and your listeners may not know, I'm raw vegan. I eat a fruit-based diet. I'm just experimenting with it. It's only been 32 and a half years so far. And I encourage people to eat mono fruit meals and simple green salads. And I mean, occasionally, it could be something a little bit more elaborated, but the simpler, the better. It should be as little dehydrated as possible because dehydrated food dehydrates us. Anyway, she claimed that's what she was doing. And yet here were her electrolytes way out of balance again. And so I had her drink celery juice. We tested them again. She came and fasted, completed her 3rd fast with no problem. And so from now on, we'll always be doing this. And my goal is actually, hopefully within the next year, we'll acquire this machine. The machine runs $3,000 to $4,000, depending on which one you choose. And it's not a tremendous amount of money, but frankly, we run pretty close to the margin. We charge less than anybody else. We haven't really kept our rates up with expenses. And, I've always tried to keep our rates as affordable as possible so that everyone could get to us. And it's a difficult strategy. If you want a business to succeed, it doesn't always work so well. But we're going to be investing in a lot of equipment because what I want to start doing is testing everything that we can that's not invasive to people so we can publish data and actually show the world what's happening, because we see amazing things happening. We see what most people in medicine would call miracles happening all the time. And I think it's important that as many people as possible get this information.
Yeah, absolutely agree there. And yeah, so we'll help get the word out as much as we can, because it is something that it's hard for people to believe, especially coming from a conventional mindset.
Right.
And it is something that we kind of have to do ourselves before we truly know. But once you do know, once you start to discover the benefits from fasting and going deeper into this, even simply things of just narrowing your eating window in the days that you are eating, it's profound what that effect can have. So incrementally easing into the way of fasting and recognizing the benefits that comes from it, then the proof is in the pudding. It's easy to see. So yeah, that's a great response there. And I'm curious, just kind of a personal question. So when I go on, it's not always, but sometimes when I go on extended, I don't do anything crazy normally, but three plus days, 3 to 5 is usually around what I do when I do a longer one. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when I break that fast, and I love doing it with watermelon, I love Yeah, which I know you guys do a lot of watermelon and papaya
Yeah.
as the ways to break your fast. But sometimes I'll find that I'll get some really intense cramping in my legs when I start to reintroduce food, when I start to reintroduce watermelon in that way. And it will take maybe a few days for that to subside. But sometimes for the first day that can be quite intense. So just curious, what do you see that and what might that be? Because
Yeah, it happens sometimes. We don't consistently see it with the reintroduction of food. We often see it during the fast itself. Usually, I think that's a magnesium deficiency. And why it's occurring for you at that stage, I'm not really sure. Obviously, something going on in your body. Probably something that could be corrected, because it's certainly not necessary. I don't experience anything like that, and there's nothing along those lines that like one would need to experience. But certainly, some people do get these cramps while fasting. It's what's interesting is that they almost always correct themselves. And in fact, we had a client many years ago who, she contacted me and she said, Loren, I was at your full day seminar somewhere near Phoenix, a month ago. And I'm really intrigued. Everything you said makes a lot of sense. I'm very interested in hearing more, but I have a magnesium deficiency and take this massive magnesium supplement, which I'm not okay without. If I don't take it, I have all these symptoms. Could I fast? And I said, yeah, you could, and you would probably resolve the issue. Well, it took me a while to convince her, but she finally came and fasted for 21 days. By the time she was about 5 days in, she had stopped taking the supplement when she started fasting. By the time she was about 5 days in, she started having some of these symptoms of magnesium deficiency. I don't recall exactly what was going on for her, but it could well have been like Charlie horses, cramps in some of the muscles and other things. And I had to keep her calm and convince her to just keep going. She'd be okay. By the time she was, I want to say it might have been a week to 10 days later into the process, those symptoms were gone and they never came back. And what was interesting was she was already eating what I would call an optimal diet. Right now, for anyone who's not aware of it, the central atom, the chlorophyll molecule, is magnesium. She was eating a large salad every night. She was eating tons of lettuce, and yet she was deficient in magnesium. And this, I think, it's a really important thing to point out, because I meet people all the time who are eating really well, much better than most people do, if not perfectly, much better than most people, and still have deficiencies. And they'll say, well, I guess I need to take a supplement. Well, you could take a supplement. It's a Band-Aid approach, though. I think there's only two reasons why one could be deficient. I'll illustrate the first one with an amazing story. I don't know if you've heard about this, Justin. I think it was now maybe 10 or more years ago. There was a young woman. She was around 20, 22 maybe, and she was hospitalized, an American woman who was hospitalized with serious kidney and liver diseases, and which was unusual for someone that age. So the backstory is that when she was 2, her mother took her to McDonald's, and she loved chicken McNuggets. And that's all she'd eaten for 20 years. Nothing except chicken McNuggets. Crazy. So if you're listening, the big news is apparently chicken McNuggets by themselves do not make a balanced diet. Okay, I know that's shocking news, but don't eat just chicken nuggets. It's not such a great idea. Obviously, if you eat poorly enough, you're going to be missing nutrients, and you're going to, that's one reason. But there are many people who are getting all the nutrients they need. They eat perfectly, but they still have problems. The problem isn't that they need more nutrients. The problem is that their body's not functioning properly. Fasting allows the body to begin processing things the way that it's meant to. In fact, it's interesting. We see people all the time now who are very, very lean. And often they don't want to fast because they don't want to lose more weight, which of course happens. And again, this is probably shocking news for you listeners, but if you don't eat for a month, you're going to lose weight. That's what happens. And these people don't want to because they're already underweight. And yet what I'm finding more and more is that these people can't gain healthy weight because they're not absorbing or assimilating anything properly, because there's so much old waste stuck in the body. It's mucoid plaque, people call it. And if it lines the small intestine where we're meant to absorb most of our nutrients, we're going to have a hard time getting what we need. And that's what happens. They're not absorbing much. We get these people through the process. I mean, I have a young woman who fasted with me recently. She is 5'7". She weighed 99 pounds when she started. She wanted to do 42 days. She made it to day 30 and decided she needed to stop as well. Another one, not the same girl I was talking about a little while ago, another one. And like most people, there's bowel movements the first few days. She had 6 bowel movements the first 4 days. There were no bowel movements for the next 26 days while fasting. And that's normal. Most people aren't going to eliminate much after the first few days. She began refeeding because she had booked a 9-week process. It's 42 days fasting and 21 days refeeding at Tanglewood. And she only did 30 days fasting. Instead of 21 days refeeding, she had 33 days refeeding. She had 12 extra days. And she spent the entire time at Tanglewood. Over those 33 days, she had 318 bowel movements. We track it every day. She had nearly 10 bowel movements a day. Now, she was one of those people that was so lean, you'd look at her and think, well, there can't be anything in there. Oh, yeah, there can be. There often is. And hers was a normal situation. In fact, when I spoke to her, 6 weeks, we do a follow-up call, 6 weeks after the end of the process, she was still eliminating many times per day and felt and looked like she was 3 or 4 months pregnant, because there was so much old material that was still in there, hydrating, but unable to leave the body yet. By now, I haven't talked to her again. It's probably been 6 more weeks or so. There's, hopefully a lot more of it's gone by now. But this is what happens. And so supplements can have a place sometimes. For instance, if someone is seriously deficient in vitamin D or B12, it's important that they supplement. But usually what they need to do is actually give the body a chance to really clean out, get hydrated so it can function properly. And this shocks people all the time. Somebody asked me recently, what supplements do I take? Now, again, I'm 37 years vegan, 32 and a half years raw vegan. I have taken 0 supplements for 31 and a half years. When I first started, I didn't understand this, and I still took some. And then I thought, well, hang on. If my body's working better than ever, and if this is really the optimal diet, I mean, there's 25 million species on the planet. How many of them need supplements? Right? They don't, because their bodies work properly and they eat the diet that they're meant for. I believe that this was the optimal diet, and that if my body was clean, I shouldn't need supplements, and everything works better than it ever has with no need for supplements. Vitamin B12 is fine. Vitamin D is fine. Now, I get sunlight when I can. I live in the tropics, and even here now when I'm in the U.S., it's gray here now. Probably the same where you are. You're not that far away from me. Here comes the train again. When the sun is shining, I'm going to be out there in it most times, if I can be. So vitamin D is not so much of an issue. Obviously, for people who live in other places, it might be different. I want to mute myself for a moment.
Yeah, no worries. It's just going back to the importance of connecting with nature. Nature provides all that we need in all ways. And so to really just celebrate and receive that abundance that she's providing is going to help with so many other things. So when we are thrust into a reality where we are inside all the time, we're never putting our bare feet on the earth, we're never feeling the sun on our skin, of course, it's going to introduce a whole wide array of complications and problems.
Exactly. And, I completely understand the thinking that says, well, just to be safe, I'm going to take some supplements. There's a problem. Okay. There's increasing research. I mean, again, honestly, it occurred to me a long time ago. Well, hang on. Is it actually good for us? Is it okay to take these unnatural sources of nutrients? That's not what we're meant to. We're meant to get everything from nature, from our food, from sunlight, in the case of D. Well, there's now many studies that show, for instance, vitamin D is important. Of course, we need to have it. It's not really a vitamin. It's really a hormone, and the body produces it when sunlight strikes the skin. So we should be making the hormones we need, not taking them in capsule form. But we need it, right? We need it. So if you're not getting it, you have to take it. Well, the studies now show the more you take, the higher the risk of bone fracture, right? We know there's problems for bones if we don't have enough, but taking this artificial vitamin D actually increases our risk of bone fracture. B12, we know, is critically important for all kinds of things, including brain function. We can create brain damage if our vitamin B12 is too low, which maybe that's what happened to me. I don't know. But the research now shows that the more B12 you supplement, the higher the risk of death from all causes. Okay, and there's similar studies that show problems with taking vitamin E, other B vitamins. What else? I mean, a whole host of things. We're meant to get these things naturally. The way we can ensure that happens is by getting our body clean and well functioning, and then eating properly and getting enough sunlight. So, we're both visiting here in Southern California. I actually grew up outside of Washington, D.C. It's pretty sunny there most of the year. We get a fair amount of sun. Seattle and Portland, London, all examples of Sweden, Norway. These are beautiful places, but they're all places where you absolutely cannot get enough sunlight all year round. I would never live in those places. I'll visit them, but I wouldn't live there. Okay, because we need to meet our body's needs if we want to be as healthy as possible.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense why taking supplements would eventually lead to complications and problems later on. It might provide a temporary appearance of fixing the problem, but it's going to create that dependency, just like any drug is going to create that dependency, and then your body's going to get used to having that in this artificial form. It's going to stop firing on its natural ways of producing that for ourselves. And then that's going to lead to long-term issues.
It can also cause imbalances in various cases. And in fact, the first study of this kind, I know we're off the fasting subject a little bit, but the first study of this kind was the Finnish smokers study. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but they had thousands of middle-aged male cigarette smokers in Finland who agreed to be followed until their death and then autopsied. And half of them got beta-carotene supplements and half of them didn't. And it was a double-blind study, which means that neither the participants nor the researchers knew who was getting the beta-carotene, who was getting a placebo until after the fact. It turned out that the men getting the beta-carotene had higher risk of lung disease. And they thought beta-carotene was protective. Well, it is when it's found naturally, okay? But we're not meant to take isolated. They found even multivitamins where you're taking, a combination of things, you still have issues. So anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff. Yeah. Well, I'd love to talk a little bit more, because I think this is a hugely special aspect of Tanglewood. So I'd love to talk about the water that you guys use and kind of the importance of the water quality and what you feel is the best form of that water. So yeah, let's talk about water.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, controversial subject on tap here, because there are many people who think, well, distilled water is pure water. Theoretically, it's not actually in most cases, but theoretically it's pure water. And therefore, that's the best we can do. The problem I've always had with that logic is, well, okay, our body needs water, but are we meant to drink pure water? Is that what nature provides us with? I mean, we need oxygen, and we breathe air in, right? Air is, as you know, is a combination of various gases. Oxygen's not even the majority of what we're taking in through the air. But what we're meant to do is breathe air, extract the oxygen, and exhale the rest. Do we want to breathe just oxygen? I don't think so. I mean, it's dangerous, and if you're going to do it, it has to be supervised by medical people. It's not something you want to be doing. It's not what we're meant to do. In nature, water always comes with minerals. Always, all natural water. Rain, for instance, as I think you know, I'm a certified permaculture instructor, and one of the things we learned when I got that certification is that rain clouds form when water molecules encounter some solid object. Okay, that's how they precipitate out of the air. Many people, distilled water advocates say rain is distilled water. And it certainly looks similar if you think about it, because you've got water in a distiller, you boil it, and then it condenses and comes back down. And on the earth, you've got water, and then water vapor leaves the planet, forms clouds and falls back down. It looks kind of similar. The difference is that unless you believe in the flat earth with the plexiglass dome over it, one version I saw years ago, that wouldn't work. In a distiller, there's a stainless steel collection plate. The steam rises, condenses when it hits the stainless steel, and then it drips into the second chamber. Well, without some solid object in the sky, that wouldn't happen. The water doesn't precipitate out of the air by itself. It has to encounter something. And so you can actually create, if you go into the desert and you take a large enough area, I think it has to be roughly 1 mile by 1 mile, and you plant trees there. I mean, you can keep the trees alive in the desert. That's the trick. But if you can, like they did this in, it wasn't that large an area, but they created a permaculture site on the other side of the Dead Sea, not in Israel, but is it Jordan? I think it's Jordan there. They created a permaculture site in some of the driest, saltiest land on the planet. And once they got it, they had to bring in water to get everything started, to get these trees to survive in the desert. But once they got it started, they didn't need any more water from outside. If you have enough of an area, the tree pollen will actually seed rain clouds. The pollen seeds the clouds because the water vapor in the air interacts with the pollen, the solid object, and it condenses, and that's what happens. So rain always contains, it's not distilled water, it contains pollutants, it contains dust, it could contain minerals. In most studies, I think the average is 3 different minerals. In some studies, they found as many as 5 or 6 different minerals in rainwater. There's always something there. So what's natural? What do animals on the planet do? What do the longest lived people on the planet do? Mostly, like if you look at the blue zones, I actually live in one in Costa Rica. These are generally relatively poor people making their living off of the land. They definitely don't have distillers in their homes. And until recently, we're drinking only spring water. Now the spring water is collected, chlorinated, and then delivered to their homes, unfortunately. Until just a few years ago, it was just spring water. Okay, it always had been. And that's what's natural. That's what every other species does. So that's what we drink. One of the reasons we're located where we are is because there was water on site. And we have our water tested about every 2 months because natural conditions can change. You want to make sure there's no animal fouling the water or something. We have it tested. Obviously, if it tastes bad, we'll have it tested immediately. We can have a test done, any day. If it was the afternoon, we'd have to wait because we normally sample the water first thing in the morning so we can get it to a lab because they want the sample to be taken the same day they test it. So we have to get it to them early in the day. But we have it tested. It's always virtually perfect. And it contains minerals. Those are inorganic minerals, which aren't a problem. Okay, so many people think, yeah, but they're going to cause arthritis. They're going to cause hardening of the arteries. No, there's no evidence for that. It shocked me to see on one of our competitors' websites, they actually had a diagram I've seen before of the distiller, and it showed the scale. There were photographs, mineral scale. And if you boil spring water in your body, inside your body, you're going to wind up with scale inside your body. Okay. But if you're boiling the water inside your body, you've got a bigger problem than scale. Okay. Obviously, we're not boiling water inside the body. The minerals don't create a problem for us any more than they do for the longest lived populations on the planet, or for the 25 million animal species who thrive drinking nature's spring and stream waters, which always contain minerals.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, of course, yeah, it's a huge topic to that's often discussed. And
right.
As far as practical solutions for people who might not have access to a spring or access to a good source, what would you suggest as far as what people do in those circumstances?
Right. Well, when traveling, I started this journey at my mother's house. She lives south of Houston and just had, normal municipal water. She drinks it. I wouldn't touch it. The only thing I could really do was go to Whole Foods or some other store, and I was buying Mountain Valley spring water in glass bottles. Okay, I don't really want water that's been sitting around in plastic bottles. Now, I've traveled quite a bit. I've spent much of the last 25 years traveling and speaking, not so much since the pandemic, but prior to that, more than 20 years on the road. And sometimes, like at airports, you can't get glass. It's usually going to be a plastic bottle. Well, I mean, I taste the water. If it tastes bad, I throw it away and buy a different brand. Because if the bottles, the truck that they were sitting in was hot enough, or the bottles were exposed to direct sunlight or heat, the plastic is going to start breaking down even faster. And if it tastes like plastic, I'm not drinking it. But normally I would, of course, Mountain Valley spring water is not an inexpensive option. High quality spring water in glass bottles is going to be a little pricey. For someone that's truly on a budget. First of all, there are springs all over the place. Now, not every spring is safe to drink from. Okay, unfortunately, we've polluted a lot of the planet's groundwater, and so if you live close to a spring, you might want to check to have the water tested to make sure it's safe to drink. I've got a client right now on Mount Shasta fasting with me remotely. I don't know if you've been there, but the headwaters of the Sacramento River, which is the longest river here in California, start right there, and the water just pours out of the mountainside. It's an incredible spot. I've been there. I've got a friend who lives currently in Oregon, and every few months he'll make a pilgrimage to Mount Shasta, at least he used to, in a truck with 100 gallons worth of containers and fill them up, and he lives off that for a while. So, if there's a spring, maybe it's not in your backyard, but it's within a couple hours, it might be worth getting enough high quality containers and figuring out how to transport them so that you can use that water. It's probably less expensive than buying it. If you really can't get good spring water, or it's just too pricey, the next best option, in my opinion, is a normal garden variety, household reverse osmosis device. And again, there's some controversy here, but distillers will take out all of the minerals. The reason that I said it before, the water is not necessarily actually pure, is because there are some types of things that can be caused by heating the water, by boiling the water. You can actually create some issues with water, depending on what was in there to begin with. And so distilled water may actually not be the most pure. In fact, the most pure water is reverse osmosis water that goes through a very expensive filter. With reverse osmosis, it's about the size of the holes. They're measured in microns, and the smaller the micron size, the fewer the things that can get through the hole besides water. And so you don't want to own the type of, I mean, you can buy a multi-$1,000 reverse osmosis filter that they use in laboratories where they need ultra pure water for a scientific experiment, even more pure than distillation provides. That's what they use. But if you use the ones that if they sell probably $150 or so, you can stick them on your kitchen counter or under the sink and connect with a separate little tap. Those devices leave about 10% of the original inorganic minerals in the water. And that's actually good. Now, why do we need inorganic minerals? I mean, people say to me all the time, and it's kind of funny because I was saying the same thing 30 years ago. We're meant to get our minerals from food. Yes, we are. Absolutely. The nutrients the body needs should be coming from plants, not from rocks, not from inorganic minerals. But we are meant to drink, right? What's natural? Water with inorganic minerals in it. Turns out, without those inorganic minerals, the water doesn't cross cell membranes very well. Okay, which means it's not very hydrating, distilled water. And it actually, so when you distill the water, you take the minerals out that are naturally there, you create a negative charge. Now, what distilled water people say is that it will attract only the positively charged pollutants in the bloodstream. But you probably remember magnetism from 6th or 7th grade science. A negatively charged magnet attracts anything that's positively charged, not just specific things. Oh, I don't like that one. I'm not going to grab that one. It doesn't work that way. So what is positively charged in the bloodstream besides these pollutants? Well, there's a few things like potassium, sodium, calcium, magnesium. One more, I'm forgetting one of the major electrolytes are positively charged. Distilled water will take them out of your system. Okay, no, it's not a good idea. So again, it brings us back to we want to do as closely as possible as to what's natural for the body. We're not going to improve on that. I mean, I truly believe, and again, I've been called all kinds of names for this over the last 30 years or so that I've been publicly speaking about these things. I don't think we can improve on nature. I think every time we try to, we create unintended side effects. So the best we could do would be to drink spring water, from the stream. If we can't get that, we want to come as close as possible. For me, that's going to be bottled spring water in glass bottles. If we can't do that, reverse osmosis at least leaves enough of the minerals in that we're not creating a problem by drinking it.
Yeah, that's good to know. And just to provide some more resources for people, there is a site called findaspring.com where you can find the springs all over. Again, proceed at your own risk with the water quality and have it tested. But I have, when I traveled around the country, I hazardly tested and tried all the water that I encountered and had no issues. And it was some of the best tasting water I'd ever had in some of these locations. So
I've used that site myself quite a bit. I recommend it to people all the time. Yeah,
it's great. And then, you mentioned the rainwater. So there are, in some countries, it's very common to collect rainwater, and it's another sort of detriment of society that a lot of states it's even illegal to collect rainwater, but that is another source that we can use as tapping into the natural harnessing of nature. Again, testing it to make sure you're not harnessing some pollutants from the air and not getting that.
It's a real issue. I live in a relatively pristine area. There's very few vehicles. Most people can't afford them. There's no industry that's polluting the air. And yet clouds of pollutants can travel thousands of miles across the sky. So we could be drinking water, rainwater that's fallen through pollutants from Los Angeles or, whatever, some of the most polluted cities on the planet. And it's interesting because the people in Central America, I guess from experience, we've all heard about acid rain. When it first starts raining, they're like, stay out of the rain when it first starts raining. Don't get rained on at the beginning of the rainy season, because they know there can be all kinds of nasty, toxic stuff in there. Now, when it rains again tomorrow, it's probably going to be a little bit cleaner than it was the first time. And again, permaculture teaches, rainwater isn't necessarily safe to drink. without filtering it first, because you don't really know what was in there. So you have to run it through you can create a natural filter. Algae, for instance, will destroy some of the pollutants if you allow it to grow in a tank of water. But you have to do something before you consume it safely. But like you, I have tried water from many springs. So far, I seem to be okay.
Yeah, sometimes I remember you get a little bit of a sulfury kind of smell, but it never affected the taste too much. And, there's nothing really wrong with that in general.
Well, interesting you say that. I mean, I find that the smell and taste are so closely linked. I guess you could just hold your nose, but actually my second location, Tanglewood second location in the U.S., we had a well, and it's often true with wells. The sulfur comes from organic material, plants that break down and in the system and rot. And it's not harmful to you, but it smells pretty strongly. I had trouble drinking that water. We used reverse.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's just bring it back to fasting. We've talked about ketosis, or we've mentioned that term. So I'd love for you, just from your words, to explain what ketosis is and why that provides such a benefit within the body in that fasted state.
Yeah. So it's a great question. And I think it's really an important thing to look at, because ketosis simply means that we are running on ketones instead of sugar. Okay. For the most part, that's what happens. Now, our bodies are set up to do this so that should there be a scarcity of food, we don't have a problem, right? We're meant to be eating things that are high in sugar. We are naturally fruit eaters. We're attracted to fruit. There's all kinds of things, and that's really a separate discussion. But, in terms of our digestive physiology, our anatomy, to me, it's very clear that we're fruit eaters, and I've helped nearly 15,000 people take their health to amazing new levels with a fruit-based diet. I know that works. But ketosis, when we're in ketosis, the body's running on ketones, except for the brain, the spleen, and the reproductive organs. Those three systems require sugar. And so our bodies, because there's precious little sugar available from fat metabolism, the body's always going to be converting a little bit of muscle to sugar at the same time. But I think it's important to understand, it's not that being in ketosis alone is the goal. Because if that were the case, you could simply follow a ketogenic diet, right? A ketogenic diet is any diet that keeps carbohydrates to a small enough, I forget how many grams you can consume, but it's very few. If there's any carbohydrates, then your body's going to look for sugar. And, it's, again, in fact, when we begin fasting, we go through a multi-step process of where the body is looking to get the energy it needs to run, right? We don't actually run on food per se. We run on microelectric current. But the body needs fuel to make electricity, and it uses food to do that. So in the absence of food, and in nature, there's floods, fires, droughts. If you're far enough away from the equator, freezes. There are times when food's not readily available. It would be a relatively, there are many people, and perhaps not so many of your listeners. I've been on some pretty mainstream podcasts where the average person really seems to believe that if they skip lunch, they might die. The fact is that would be a pretty silly design for a species to live in nature where there's all kinds of uncertainty, including in terms of climatic uncertainty, and sometimes you can't find any food. The fact is that the average person can go 6 to 8 weeks without a meal if they know what they're doing and be perfectly fine. And in fact, we've taken people much longer than that, but we can talk about that if you want to later. So it's not simply about being in ketosis. You have to be resting, as I said earlier, to allow the body to be able to use the energy to detoxify. Simply running on ketones doesn't do it. But what I was starting to say was when we stop eating, your body is looking for sugar. It first looks to the digestive tract, then it goes to the liver for glycogen, and then when there's no sugar available, it begins to convert muscle to sugar. It doesn't immediately go for fat. And what this tells me very clearly is that our bodies want to run on sugar. They've got plenty of fat available, most people, right? Most people are walking around with months worth of fat reserves. And yet within 12 hours of missing a meal, your body is saying, where can I get sugar, not fat? It's looking for sugar. So I think it's important to understand that. Okay. So ketosis means we're running on ketones, but we have to be resting to make that productive and valuable for the body. And we go into ketosis the average person about 3.5 days into the process. But it actually takes 10 to 11 days for the fat metabolism to ramp up while muscle consumption comes down. And this is easy to see if you, first of all, we use bioimpedance analysis. We can measure fat and muscle, but you can also look at ketone levels in the blood. Now, if you're measuring ketones in the urine, that's different. It's not really quite the same thing. It gives you some sense of it, but it's not really the full story. You really want to look at what the ketone levels are in the bloodstream. If you measure those, they're going to go up for about 10 or 11 days, and then they're going to stay relatively constant. I mean, they're going to bounce around, but they're going to be relatively constant. They're going to be bouncing around up here, not down here. They start down here, and they come up, and then they'll do that. So we can see 10 or 11 days in, you're fully in ketosis. Now, this is important because, remember, ketosis happens as a result of fat metabolism. Ketones are our breakdown product for metabolizing fat. This is important because the body, in its virtually infinite intelligence, stores most toxins in fatty tissue where they're least harmful to you. It doesn't want to store them in vital organs, right? That's not good. It happens. I mean, most people have toxins in their heart and the liver and the lungs and the brain. But the body tries to store as much of the toxic material as possible in fatty tissue where they can do the least amount of damage. Okay, so it's only when we're breaking down this fatty tissue at the fastest rate that we're detoxifying as quickly as possible. This is one of the reasons why our clients almost universally fast for 21 days or longer, because it takes 10 to 11 days to get to the deepest part of the process. With 21 days, you've then got 10 or 11 days in the deepest part of the process. Whereas if you spend that's a 4-week process. There's 7 days refeeding. If you spend 3 weeks with us instead of 4, I'll let you fast with 3 weeks for 16 days. You need 5 days for refeeding. People often think, well, I can just refeed at home. Oh no, this is critically important that this is done properly. And so we have a very specific protocol, and it's 16 and 5 with 3 weeks. But that means you've only got 5 or 6 days in the deepest part of the process. You've got roughly twice as much time by doing 1 more week. And by the way, I mean, if you go from 4 weeks to 5, you go from 10, 11 days to 15 to 16, you've got 50% more time in the deepest part of the process with 1 additional week. And so a lot of people choose to do that as well. And what we see happening, with the miracles that we see, and we see what most people would call miracles, we see happening all the time. Things that are not supposed to happen, things that people are told that can't heal. We see them healing all the time. So that's what ketosis is. Again, I think the important point here, it's not simply being in ketosis. It's being in ketosis and resting as much as possible. And by the way, there's a lot of evidence that ketogenic diets, that the body does not want to be. I've already made this point, but the body does not want to stay in ketosis. It's a great thing that we can run on ketones temporarily, but if we do this long term, there's actually detrimental effects. So we're far better off going back to running on sugar like we're do.
Yeah, it's an emergency mode. Exactly. It's not something to be sustained long term. But in that sort of emergency mode, we can prompt the body to move into deeper forms of healing, and that's why fasting is so powerful in that.
That's right.
But yes, not shifting our diet to this emergency mode all the time because you're introducing all sorts of other issues. And yeah, I like what you said about the fat sources holding the toxins. And that's why when we go deeper into levels of fasting and detoxing, perhaps at some point, wherever you consume that toxic material associated with whatever sort of potentially traumatic events that you were going through in that period of your life, they can resurge and you can have those moments during the cleansing process. So curious what you'd like to say on that topic, as far as what people emotionally have gone through during the fasting moments, what sort of things come up on a regular basis in those extended fasts?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not sure. First of all, I'm going to address it kind of in two parts. First of all, as we detoxify the old toxic material from the body, there definitely are memories. When we're talking about old food material like the mucoid plaque, as that stuff breaks down and we begin reabsorbing toxins in the bloodstream, which is not something to worry about. It's going to happen, but there's no way around it. If you want to get the stuff out of your body, you've got to hydrate it. And when you do, you're going to reabsorb things. It goes into the bloodstream and then is filtered back out of the body. So we don't have to worry about that. But when that's happening, when we're rehydrating the stuff, I mean, people will start to have memories of cravings for, dreams about the things that they haven't eaten in 25 or 30 years sometimes, even longer. And it's clear to me that this is happening specifically because, excuse me, they're rehydrating this old waste. That's what's going on. Now, in terms of emotions tied to the substances, I'm not sure. I mean, we don't have a way to measure that. But what I'm very sure about, and we touched on this very briefly at the beginning of our conversation, most people, and I mean, I've now worked with a lot of people, have met many more traveling around the world, giving large events, lectures and seminars. I believe I can say that probably everyone I've ever met has been suppressing certain emotions. This is what we do. Okay. Most of us, as guys growing up, and it's interesting, again, my clients have come from 149 countries. I don't think there's ever been a guy that couldn't complete this sentence: big boys don't. Everyone knows. It doesn't matter where you grew up on the planet. Everyone's taught the same thing. Okay. What's the message there? Sadness is feminine. Men shouldn't feel sad, or at least shouldn't express it, right? Okay, that's nonsense. All emotions are natural, positive, healthy. There are times where it's perfectly appropriate to be angry, for instance. There's nothing wrong with anger. I mean, if you're walking around angry all the time, you might want to take a step back and take a look at your worldview and what you're believing. And how you're meeting your needs. But, there are times where it's perfectly appropriate. So we've learned that we shouldn't feel certain things, and we learn to suppress them. And I believe, actually, what boredom, I believe, is nothing more than your ego screaming at you to get busy so you don't have to feel those suppressed emotions. Because what happens when you get quiet and still enough? They start bubbling up to the surface. And that's when something says, okay, do something, anything, right? Or eat something, which isn't available when you're fasting, right? So you're looking for ways to distract yourself. And in fact, it's fascinating, at the risk of alienating some of my favorite people. There is one cohort that has a problem, the only one. Guys, normally around 25 and under, about half of them run away. They don't finish their fast, the fast they come to do. And I think it's because, as guys at that age, we are notoriously bad at dealing with our emotions. Women, females, typically are a little bit more emotionally mature at that age. So children don't have a problem with this because they express their emotions. It's only later we learn, we're not supposed to do that. Right? We cry as little boys, and then we get to the point where, we're not supposed to cry anymore. Instead, we start suppressing things. And many of us never overcome this, but hopefully, as we become more emotionally mature, as we get older, we learn that there's nothing wrong with expressing emotions. We have tissue boxes everywhere at Tanglewood because we want everyone to express whatever emotions are coming up for them, because that's actually the healthy thing to do. And when we do that, they dissipate of their own accord. But young guys have such a hard time that they'll often run away before they complete the process. And so there's no question that a lot of emotions come up for people. And most people wind up ending the process much more emotionally balanced than when they arrived. It's incredible what happens. And I really do believe that a significant part of that, it's not just that some people, I think people have varying degrees of success at being willing and able to feel those emotions. But even when people don't do that very well, detoxifying the body, allowing, being able to get rid of some of those toxins in the body makes a significant difference in and of itself. Just that makes a big difference. There are emotions that are connected to foods, to things we're consuming. And, I think there's a couple of pieces of evidence I can share that I think make this point pretty well. You don't have any children, but I'm guessing you might have been a child at some point, Justin. You may recall, I don't know if many parents know this. If a kid eats a bunch of sugar shortly before they go to bed, they're going to have nightmares. Okay, so there's something going on there between the food in their body and what's going on for them mentally, emotionally, etc. That's the first one. The second one, it's said that in the early days of the Olympics back in ancient Greece, the Olympic athletes ate a fruit-based diet. I had a friend who was a professor, a PhD professor of religion at NYU. He died some years ago, but he said that back then, he was a scholar, back then the Olympians ate a fruit-based diet, and they had these amazing physiques, right? But at the same time, the Greek government saw fit to feed the soldiers a meat-based diet. Why did they do that? It made the soldiers aggressive. Okay, there's no question that what we eat affects how we feel. And so as we detoxify, we eat these foods, we have these emotional responses or reactions to them when various substances, chemicals are in the bloodstream, hormones, phytonutrients, whatever it may be. With animals, I suspect I'm sure you've seen many of the documentaries, and that as the animal is, for instance, at a slaughterhouse, they know what's coming, right? They see what's happening around them. They know what's coming, and their adrenaline levels shoot up because they're afraid. Okay, they're about to be killed. And then you eat that, and you're eating that adrenaline. Is that a good thing? No, I don't think so. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. Just on the emotional aspects and the releasing part, and of course unwinding the big lies that have brought us into this sort of devolved state that we found ourselves. So curious, just to kind of add on to the inner workings, let's talk a little bit about parasites, because that's another avenue that we have other organisms that are truly tapped into and directing our emotions and our cravings and other aspects. So what is your experience in seeing parasite releases during and after the long extended fast at your retreat center?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a very interesting subject because it's not like most people experience this, but I see a dozen or more people every year. I fast about 300 people a year now, every year for many years. It used to be more. We used to be open all the time. We're actually going back to a open most of the time schedule. Won't be all the time, but it'll be most of the time. So we'll often see people who come in with a diagnosis of parasite infestation, parasite issues, but we won't see the parasites leave their body. And yet by the end of the process, those symptoms are gone. So I'm guessing what happens is our virtually infinitely intelligent bodies will break these parasites down, take whatever they can of value from them, and excrete the rest. And we may not ever see them that way. Other times, we will have people who are eliminating parasites. It's visible. And I have a client who's coming back this summer. I think he's coming in mid-August for his third fast with me. The first two were 26 and 42 days, respectively, fasting. This guy's big. I think the last time we saw him, he was 350 or 370 pounds, something like that, when he came in. And unfortunately, he's so far, he's gone home and recreated the same issues by going back and eating poorly again. And so in the first two fasts, he's so far, he's fasted 68 days with me. He has had at least one bowel movement each of those 68 days, okay? And some days more than one. And that, by the way, again, that's not normal. I told you about the young woman who had 4 bowel movements, 6 bowel movements in the first 4 days, and then there were no bowel movements for the next 26 days. That's more typical. You know, some people might have one every once in a while. And by the way, I mean, what should happen is we should have our last meal, 8 to 12 hours later, have a bowel movement, and then it shouldn't be possible to have any more because our system should be empty. That's what should happen. 8 to 12 hours after the meal, everything is out. I have never seen a single person like that. Okay, what happens, in fact, is that most of our clients wind up eliminating anywhere from 10 to 20 pounds of old, hard material. Now, again, somewhat controversial subject. Some people out there say it doesn't exist, including doctors are taught this stuff doesn't exist. I've now fasted 15 or 16 MDs and many chiropractors and naturopaths. Every one of those doctors would tell you, oh yeah, it definitely exists, because it's obvious. You know, when we're eating fruit, papayas and watermelons and pineapples and mangoes, our bowel movements are quick, easy, painless, clean, and odor-free. It's obvious what it is. These people eliminate stuff which can be everything but those 5 things, you know, often difficult and painful and time-consuming and hard and foul-smelling and messy, you know, to clean up. Not the. I mean, they're eating only watermelon and papaya, but they're eliminating definitely something very, very different than that, and a lot of it. And in fact, it's interesting because, you know, people have said, well, they do colonoscopies. The doctors say it doesn't exist, right? They look, it doesn't. Well, it's not in the colon. Okay, it's in the small intestine. I mean, think about this, right? Your large intestine is roughly as long as your height. So you're, what, about 6 feet tall, right? You and I are the same. Okay, large intestine comes up from the ileocecal valve, basically comes up, gently loops over, comes across, gently loops down, over 45 degrees and out. That's it. There's no, it's you know, that's the diameter. It's about 1.5 inches. The small intestine is 1/3 the diameter, which means 1/9 the surface area. Okay, it's a much smaller tube. Between the ileocecal valve on my body, and again, I think we're about the same height, from the bottom of my stomach. By the way, most people think the stomach is in the belly. The stomach's actually up here, closer to your chest. From the bottom of the stomach to the ileocecal valve in the right groin, on my torso, is roughly a foot, okay, 30 centimeters. In that space, there's roughly 7 meters of small intestine. So it's all twists and turns, and it's a narrow tube. And that's where stuff's going to get stuck. It's going to get stuck. It's circular like a vacuum cleaner hose. That's where the stuff is going to get stuck. So I had a client who fasted with me 3 times. Twice after having his entire colon removed because it was dead black tissue. Okay, he came to me the first time. He looked horrible. He was 28 years old. He looked horrible. And it wasn't hard to see why. I mean, he was a great guy. He was a very successful young man. He wrote a book while fasting. He wrote all night long while he should have been sleeping. resting with his eyes closed. And then he would rest in a hammock while sipping water all day. I'm like, dude, you ought to be sleeping. No, I want to get this book done. You're not going to heal that way. Okay, he went home. They later found that he had cancer and that his colon was completely black, dead tissue. So they removed it, and he had what's called an ileostomy. The ileum, they bring the end of the small intestine through an opening they make in the belly, and there's a bag like a fanny pack he would have to plug this little nub into, and when he would eat, instead of the stuff going into the colon, it would go into this bag. So he did 2 40-day fasts, 2 42-day fasts without having a colon. Every day there was material going from the small intestine into the bag. Seems clear to me that's where the stuff was stuck. Because otherwise, what should have happened if it was all in the colon, then, he didn't have a colon. That means it would have gone into the bag sometime earlier, and there would have been no elimination during the process. Every single one of those 84 days that he fasted twice for 42, there was stuff dumping into the bag with no food coming in. Okay, so it makes sense, and this sort of seems to clarify this is what's going on.
Yeah, wow. That's such a gift to have that firsthand of a look to really prove that this is coming from the small intestines. Because, yeah, I'm curious, how did he do after those longer fasts? Was he able to find some semblance where he didn't have to utilize that contraption, or?
Well, no. I mean, unfortunately, once the colon's been removed, it's not going to grow back. And so he was, they had altered his body so that this small intestine came out through an opening in the abdomen that they created, and he would have to use the contraption for the rest of his life. He did okay. He unfortunately, he eventually died. I mean, he had stage 4 cancer, and he was told, his oncologist told him he needed 5 years of chemotherapy. Now, he was from Canada, one of those central provinces. I forget exactly where, but Canada has some sort of universal health care, but apparently, depending on the situation, sometimes you have to pay something. So he was told that he was going to need 5 years of chemotherapy at a cost out of pocket of $5,000 a month. That's $300,000 they wanted him to pay. And he said to the doctor, what are my chances of survival? And she said, we don't keep those statistics. That was a lie. He found the statistics online. What he said was it looked to him like he had a 2% chance of survival if he did that. And so he said to the oncologist, I'm going to go fast again. And she said, well, you'll be dead within a month. And that was before the first one. He fasted for 42 days. He came back a year later and fasted again for 42 days. He survived, I think, another year. So roughly 2 years beyond what they told him. And then, it's unfortunately, sometimes when someone has something that's so far advanced, it's hard for the body to recover from that. We do see people with stage 4 cancer healing frequently, but not every case.
Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah, so I think it'd be good to see if anyone wants to jump in with any questions. So if anyone is listening, wants to ask any questions, this would be a great opportunity to raise your hand, and that will signal to me that you want to ask Loren something, just about the retreat center, about fasting in general, about anything we've shared today. But while people sort of do that, just wanted to ask what you would say to someone who this was the first time they've heard about fasting, or the first time maybe they've really considered going more deeply into it. Yeah. What would be some suggestions that you'd offer them as they're sort of embarking upon that? So to kind of take away from, I'm sure you've learned through trial and error through various things. So what would be some approaches that you'd offer to help avoid some of these pitfalls?
Right. Well, I mean, for people that have a lot of trepidation, I think it often makes sense to start with a shorter fast just to see that you can survive. I mean, I tongue in cheek, half kidding, but I grew up with some experience with fasting. I'm Jewish on my parents' side. I'm completely non-religious, but I grew up fasting 1 day a year. I knew I could do that. When I read this book by Arnold Ehret, I thought, okay, well, I'll try 2 days. But I really wasn't sure that I could survive 2 days. I was a little nervous. I'd never heard of anyone doing that before. I mean, Gandhi, people like that, right? But, and so I did that. And then so I think one strategy is to start with shorter fasts just to see that you'll be okay. But I'll tell you something that virtually every fasting expert over the years has said, and that is that fasting more than 5 to 7 days without having experienced guidance isn't a good idea. And I can tell you, it's interesting. There's a woman here in California who came to me a few months ago. She had fasted twice on her own for 40 days, and had done a lot of dry fasting as well. A whole nother subject we could get into if you wanted to. But she came to me, she sort of said, I want to try fasting in Costa Rica. Like I'm coming here because you're in Costa Rica. I already know what to do. Like I already know everything I need to know. But to give her some credit, she was coachable. By the end of the process, she left us, 9 weeks after she arrived. She said, this was by far the most powerful and beneficial thing I've ever done. I can't believe how much I've learned. Everybody who's ever come to us who'd fasted on their own, and that's a lot of people, has said the same thing. It's far more beneficial and far safer. They can relax because they know that we're looking out for them. And because with so much experience, I figured out a few things that, that most people don't know. So they're able to really relax and surrender to the process. I think that's really important. If you're paralyzed with fear, you're not going to get the same benefit from the process. You have to really be able to relax and surrender to it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I know you guys offer the remote work as well for people who might not be able to make a trip to Costa Rica to visit the facility. So that gives an easier option. So yeah, kind of describe that process, how that might differ a little bit than obviously.
Well, sure. Yeah, I mean, for those people, first of all, I think it's fair to say that for anybody who can get to us, it's virtually always better at the center where you're away from your own environment, which is much more difficult to fast in. You're away from those people who love you, who don't understand the process, because that can be really challenging, and away from unfinished projects, etc. It's much easier being out of that environment. You also have the benefit of being part of this supportive community of like-minded people, and my amazing team takes care of everything for you. You really don't need to do anything. They'll clean your room. They'll do your laundry once a week. They feed you when it's time to feed you. They make sure you've got clean, fresh water in the big container in your room every day. And, there's really not too much you have to do for yourself. And that makes it a lot easier as well. But with remote fasting, remote fasting, I think, is fantastic for people. I'm at a client's house right now here in Encinitas. She fasted with me once with her husband and her 2 kids. It was very powerful for everyone in the family. The other 3 said, okay, that was great. That was enough. Thank you for that. She's wanted to continue. And so she just completed her 8th fast with me. All have been between 21 and 30 days. This last one was 26 days. And each one has taken her to a whole new, now the first one was life-changing for her. And subsequent fasts have been a little bit more subtle, but each one, every single, and she said to me, to the group of us, just 2 weeks ago when she finished this one, she said, okay, I'm looking forward to the next one in 6 months. She said, I think the next one might be the last long one I need to do. And then I'll just do 21 days each year instead of 26 or 30. Because she feels like she's almost there now and just wants to do maintenance once a year after this one. But she doesn't want, her family's not interested in doing it again, and she doesn't want to be away from her family. So she fasts at home. They're supportive enough that, for her, it works to be here. I have clients from all over the world who can't, I mean, it's difficult to afford to fly across the ocean and pay our rates. And so when they work with me remotely, they don't have to travel. It costs less, and we have a payment plan. You know, when people come to us, as I said before, we don't, pretty much what we take in covers our expenses, just covers our expenses. So we do require people to pay up front. When people work with me remotely, they can pay a down payment and then make payments for the next 10 to 12 months on the balance. And it makes it much easier for people to be able to afford. So it's great for those reasons. But if you can get to us, you probably want to. What happens with the remote fasters is, I'm just checking time to see where I am with the next call. I've got plenty of time. I do several calls a day with groups of people. Normally, I've got one call with people who are mostly in Europe, one that's usually people in North America, and one that's usually people in the Pacific Rim, Australia, New Zealand, China, Japan, like that. And I have a woman right now in someone I'm talking to tonight in Australia, and someone just finished up in Bali, and a woman in Taiwan. Every day they need to have a blood pressure monitor, a thermometer, and a scale, ideally a bioimpedance scale. We send them the same spreadsheet we use at the center, a Google document. I share it with them. They complete a bunch of fields every day. They take all their vital signs, and I ask them how much sleep they got, how much water they drank. I asked them to keep track, how many bowel movements they had, various things like that. They track all that. They put any comments down, and then we speak on a group call, relatively small groups, no more than 6 people. So I have time to talk with each person, and I pull up each person's spreadsheet on the screen so everyone can see it. We talk about what the numbers mean, what they're experiencing, how they're doing, answer any questions they have. They also get remotely, they get every day. So with people at the center, there's a lecture every day of 1 hour. I want people to leave fully empowered to make the best choices that they can. It's up to them whether they do or not, but they'll be empowered so that they, we're trying to help people get to the point where they don't need us anymore. Many people fast 2, 3, 4 times, but we want them to get to the point where they don't need to come back. And so I'm trying to teach everyone how to eat. I mean, I don't think I've said this, but you started out asking me about my own background and history and how I got into fasting. And I told you I was very sick at 23, sicker than anyone I knew. At 26, I walked away from medicine. I've never looked back. I have never been to a doctor, with the exception of for trauma medicine. And once, because I needed an insurance policy, I had to get full physical exam to get that insurance policy. But aside from that, I've never been to a doctor, and I haven't been sick one day in 37 years. And this is not, there's nothing miraculous about me. I'm an ordinary person with all kinds of, genetic issues. My family has, digestive tracts don't work well, all kinds of things. But I've gotten past all that. And, I'm here to tell you, almost anyone can feel and function incredibly well if they're willing to get all the garbage out of their body, get the body hydrated, which you have to fast to be able to do, something we haven't talked. We talked about the mucoid plaque, but it sits there like a giant sponge. So until you get rid of it, it's impossible to get hydrated. And we've been measuring this now for 19 plus years. We've seen we've seen about 7,000 people we've measured in those years. Incredible how dehydrated some people are and what that does to how well they function. But anyway, so the people working with me remotely, they're not getting a live lecture every day, but they get a video every day from me, and they get an email every day from me to help keep them motivated, inspired, educated. At the end of the process, we give everybody, remote or with us, we give them a written 6-week plan to help them remember what the best choices are. And not just in terms of diet, but also exercise, sleep, all of the key areas so that they can take their health to the highest level possible. And then there's a follow-up call with them 6 weeks after they finish the process. And again, this is true whether it's remote or on-site. I talk to each person. It's up to them, but I'm happy to talk to each person and happy to check in, see if they've got questions, see how they're doing, see if there's anything else I can do to help them.
Yeah, that's great to hear, and definitely a great thing to offer. Yeah, so thanks for that. And I saw that Tracy had raised her hand, so go ahead, sister. Did you have a question?
Actually, I hit the button because I started moving around. So, but I'll just take the opportunity anyways to say thank you to you, Loren. Everything that it's been a beautiful discussion. So thank you for all your input and sharing your absolutely, sounds very miraculous, healing center, healing journey, and so many people that you've helped. So yeah, bless you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tracy. I appreciate that. Glad you could join us.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. I appreciate that. Yeah, does anyone else have any questions or things, any points or any experience with fasting or things that have come up, aspects that you'd like to get into? If you do, feel free to raise your hand. And if not, no worries too. We can certainly start to bring this to a close. Just curious, Loren, did you have any other topics or things you wanted to get into, discuss further?
There are so many things we could talk about. I mean, we could probably be here forever, but there's all the things that we see happening. People always ask, well, what conditions are benefited? Remember, coming all the way back to the beginning, cleansing and healing are biological processes. So fasting done correctly is simply giving the body the optimal conditions to cleanse and heal, regardless of what the condition is. Will everything heal? No. I've given some examples of things that aren't going to heal. I mean, again, sometimes advanced cancer. Any condition advanced enough, the body may or may not have the vitality to be able to heal from that. It's not that the body can't heal that condition. It's that that particular body may no longer be able to heal in the same way. And so, what I'll tell people is they'll say, well, will fasting help me heal this? We can't promise any specific results to a specific person because each body is different. My body is different than your body. But what I'll tell people is if your body can still heal this, fasting is the very best way to allow it to heal. And if I may, maybe I'll give you one example of a kind of a miraculous thing that we don't normally see. I mentioned this actually when we met. I was speaking in Santa Monica 10 days ago. A young woman who'd been in a terrible car accident, was paralyzed from here down, considered quadriplegic because although she could move her arm, she couldn't control her hands to be able to do this. And she fasted 30 days. She would have gone longer, by the way. Her stepmother was a doctor, and she was at her father's house doing this process. And her stepmother forced her to stop on the 30th day and gave her a bunch of IVs against her will. This is intravenous feeding with sugar and electrolytes, etc. Sure that she was hurting herself going 30 days without food. She began to eliminate, that is to have bowel movements, for the first time in 4.5 years, over 4 years, without needing mechanical assistance of some kind. She began to feel her spine for the first time in over 4 years. And she can now hold a glass, something she couldn't do before. And the point of this is, telling you this, is that medicine says, if you've been paralyzed for 2 years and there's been no improvement, there's zero chance of improvement. It's not going to happen. And yet she's improved. She wants to fast again to see if she can improve even further and longer this time. She's waiting until she can move away from her father's house back to California. This happened in California, the accident. She moved to the Philippines. She was Filipino, but born and raised in the U.S., but of Filipino descent. And she went to the Philippines because it was too expensive to have the 24-hour care she needed in California. But she wants to come back here and try again without her stepmother interfering. Her stepmother, by the way, said, now keep in mind, this woman had dozens, I think more than 50 surgeries after the accident. And who knows, probably hundreds of IVs. her stepmother, the doctor, claimed that these improvements that she had happened because of the IVs, not because of the fasting. Denial is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And yes. So with that example, it was the IV that sort of stimulated her to start having the bowel movements, which I guess would be akin to just the refeed, moving that system along in the
No,
same
well,
sort of.
no, she had IVs for 1 or 2 days, and then she actually continued the refeeding process with me. And she didn't eliminate. I mean, most people won't eliminate until about the 4th day, because whatever's in there is going to be pretty hard and dry. And so usually it's about the 4th day. I mean, most people she was at the time in her 30s. So she would have been breaking down and hydrating stuff that had been in her body for 30 plus years. That stuff is usually pretty hard and dry. There's a woman here from Encinitas who did her second fast with me, and her roommate came to get me on the 19th night. Now, again, most people don't move this old material until they're refeeding for several days, but she had already fasted for 21 days and had eaten perfectly for 2 years. I mean, I was actually visiting here 3 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago. She took me to Peace Pies, which at the time was not yet rebuilt in Encinitas, was down in Pacific Beach in San Diego. She took me there for dinner one night. And while I ate some gourmet raw food, which definitely had me feeling less than perfect the next day, she ate only salad. I mean, her diet was cleaner than mine. And so after fasting 21 days and eating perfectly for more than 2 years, her body was able to move this stuff. It was the 19th night of her fast. Her roommate came to get me and said, she needs to see you. I went to her room, 9 o'clock at night. She was lying on the bed sobbing. And she said, I just passed what felt like 2 huge chunks of concrete. That's how hard this stuff was. Someone else told me just a couple months ago, he eliminated something, went out and got a stick and poked it. He said it was hard as a rock. Okay, this is what happens. This is the mucoid plaque leaving the body.
Yeah, the supposed mythical thing that doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's something. Yeah, well, another question kind of popped in. Just curious. So, do you often have people that have I know when you talked about sleeping, you mentioned resting with your eyes closed. So is that an issue where people might have a hard time drifting off to sleep when they're in that fasted state? And what do you suggest in those moments?
Yeah. Again, what happens varies significantly from one person to the next. It's not like it's always this way. But it's not unusual for people to have trouble sleeping sometimes. Some people have no trouble sleeping. Some people sleep 12, 13 hours every night. But most people need less sleep than usual while they're fat. They're not processing food. They're not being physically active. They're resting all day. By the time they turn off the lights at night, they don't need as much sleep as they normally would. But some people have trouble sleeping. And my guess is if you think back in your own lifetime, Justin, whenever you've had a cold or flu, there have probably been many times where you felt okay during the day, but at night, not very well. And I believe that we virtually always detoxify faster at night. And the reason why is because we are diurnal animals. Okay, we're meant to be awake and active in daylight hours. I mean, imagine if we lived in the tropical jungle. I don't know about you. I'm not wandering around the jungle in the dark. Okay, it's a scary place in the dark. No, thank you. I'm gonna, as it starts to get dark, I'm gonna find a place that looks relatively safe to settle. Assuming we're living in the jungle, not in a building in the jungle like I do, but in the jungle itself. I'm gonna find a place to settle down for the night, and I'm gonna stay there until the sun comes back up and I can see where I'm going. I'm not walking around in the dark. And so what happens when it starts to get dark, our hormones change, everything slows down, liberating energy for the body to use to cleanse and heal. And so it's common to have more symptoms at night than during the day. Not everyone does, but it's a common experience.
Interesting. Yeah. And sort of going back to sort of drawing in the emotional release part of it, and just the fact that you do typically have 30 people on site fasting at the same time, is the communal gathering part of it typical, or are people usually off on their own, or does it vary considerably as well?
Well, typically what happens is, again, I gave you a sense of the day, or at least the first part of the day earlier. We ask everyone between 7 and 9 a.m. We ask everyone to come to the office. They put their name on a list. We call them in to get weighed in that order that they show up. And then we measure their vital signs in that order, and we see them that day in that order. Okay. So most people arrive between 7 and 9. They're going to be there. We probably finish measuring everyone's vitals by, let's say, 10 o'clock or so. And then there's a lecture from 11 to 12. And so most people are from anywhere between, let's say, 7 and 9 in the morning, 7, 8 in the morning. They're going to be in the common area until around noon each day. Usually. Most people stay for the lecture every day, get a lot from it. Some people will hang around for the rest of the day. Some people immediately go back to their rooms after the lecture, or someplace where they have more solitude, and just to spend the time with themselves. But that varies. But yeah, there's ample opportunity for people to be together. But by the way, I didn't mention it. We also offer some evening meditations, and we have a movie one night a week. On Wednesday nights, we show a film, just to give people a chance to relax, forget about what they're doing.
Yeah. And that kind of brings me into the next one in regards to sort of visual stimulation, even reading books or looking at phone screens or things like that. What do you suggest as far as people do to limit that, or to do alternatively to that?
I really encourage people to do as little as they're willing to. And that really means, absolutely nothing more than necessary. Right now, anyone listening, right, you're looking at your screen, you're looking at us on your screen. Even if I wasn't saying anything, neither of us were saying anything, if there's nothing except the visual, 60% of the brain lights up with incoming visual information. This is why when we're tired enough, what do we instinctively do? Close our eyes. Okay. Now, if I'm in a place where I feel safe, I probably don't want to do this standing on a street corner in New York City, but if I'm, here I am in a place I feel perfectly comfortable and safe. If I'm tired enough, I'll close my eyes. Why? Because I shut off all that brain circuitry. Okay. So reading a book isn't resting. Now, when I have a vacation, I have a break from work, reading a book feels restful to me relative to working. But when you're trying to liberate as much energy as possible so your body can cleanse and heal, you don't want to be reading. You don't want to be watching things on screens. Obviously, many people have a business, things they need to attend to, or people, a family members, a partner they need to be in touch with or want to be in touch with. Okay, that's fine. I would encourage everyone to minimize all screen time and to spend as little time as possible doing anything they don't need to actually rest with eyes closed as much as they're willing to rest. The other thing, you asked before for tips, I encourage people to spend time on the ground every day. Okay, if it's summertime, it could be on a towel or a blanket on the grass. If it's wintertime, it's a little harder. Unless you have grounding shoes, you're probably not going to really have the chance to ground so much. You could use a grounding mat that plugs into the grounding system of your household electrical system. It grounds you. We're constantly subjected, most of us here in my friend's house, there's Wi-Fi and there's the neighbor's Wi-Fi, right? Probably 10 or 12 systems, maybe 20 systems. That's affecting me. There's cell phone towers. I have no idea where they are, but I know they work here. It means that the signal is getting to my body, the microwave radiation, as well as to my phone, and more. The household electrical systems, all this stuff is affecting us. And grounding allows us to let go of a lot of that garbage radiation, EMF, electromagnetic radiation. So this is another key thing that's important to do, is to spend some time. At Tanglewood, it's easy because in the tropics, it's always summertime. So you can always spend some time on the grass. Even sitting in the common area, there's going to be some loss of connection to the ground. Our buildings, we have some wooden buildings. That's a little different. But like the main area, that building was there when I got there. It's a concrete floor with ceramic tile on it. Yeah, that's going to interrupt the ability to ground to some degree, but there's still some ability to ground through that. And so I encourage, most people are in flip-flops or sandals. I'd say, hey, take them off. When you get where you're going, you don't necessarily have to walk barefoot, but when you get where you're going, take them off, put your feet on the floor. That way you're going to have some grounding happening all the time.
Yeah, great suggestion to do really anytime we're able to. And even if it is cold, what I found is a great practice. People often make fun of hippies for tree hugging, but placing your bare skin on a tree, you're going to be getting that same grounding effect, and you're not having to maybe put your bare feet out in the cold. So just finding some way to come in contact with the earth or something natural connected to the earth is going to get that grounding effect.
Even your hands and face, there's some grounding happening.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, anything else you want to get into before we wrap up today?
I mean, again, there's so many things we could cover. It's, I think I feel complete for now. Unless there's questions, I'm always happy to answer. Anybody else have a question?
Yeah, I haven't seen anyone else raise their hand. I'll just give another prompt to see if anyone wants to chime in while we've got Loren with us. He spends a lot of time with a whole bunch of people all over the world answering questions and helping people out in these spaces. So we are truly fortunate to have him here in this space today. So if you have any questions, this would be a great opportunity to do so. And if not, no worries whatsoever.
Well, so, it occurs to me either we've done a great job and already answered everyone's questions, or we've put them all to sleep and they're still online, but they're actually quietly snoring in front of their phones.
Yeah, well, I'll go with the former, and we'll just take that as a good sign that we've covered what we needed to. We've discussed what we needed to today. So yeah, I'll just say that, if you want to find more about Loren's Tanglewood Wellness Retreat, you can find it on their website, tanglewoodwellnesscenter.com. That's a great space to check it out, to see what the facility is like and to check out the options there within that space. It's always been on my radar as a space where I'd like to go do an extended fast. I told Loren that the other day, and he was very generous in saying, well, if we can get some other people on board and going, that can go towards helping you to be able to cut down your costs. So if you do decide to go to the retreat center, make sure you mention that you heard it from this show or heard it from me, because that'll just go help out in that space. And then we can heal together. How wonderful to go deeper into this healing experience together.
Absolutely. So, yeah. We ask her in the intake form. There's an application form that we ask you to complete that gives us health history, etc. And we ask how you heard about us. So just make sure that you tell us that you heard about us through this podcast. By the way, I'd like to offer your listeners a gift. I have an ebook, and I'm embarrassed to tell you, I don't remember what it's called, but I think the one we still have available right now is about optimal diet. And so, what happens when you fast is amazing. It's like a giant reset. But obviously, when you get home, maintaining all the benefits you get depend on the choices that you make. As I've said, I haven't been sick in 37 years, and I'm convinced anyone can do the same thing, but most people don't know how to. So if you're interested in that ebook, just drop me a note at info@tanglewoodwellnesscenter.org. That's .org, and we will gladly get that ebook to you. Just remind me that you heard about this on Justin's podcast, and we'll be happy to get that off to you.
Thank you. That's really generous of you and really appreciated, just to have that your lifelong experience and knowledge acquired through this time to share it in a condensed way. That's very quite.
I'm
quite
very,
generous.
very happy to share everything I can. That's why I so love, I mean, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today because, my goal has been to get this information to as many people as possible. Honestly, folks, we stay pretty full most of the time. So I think you should come to Tanglewood because we work hard to make it the very best fasting center that there is. But if you're fasting, you're doing it safely and properly, I'm happy.
Beautiful. Yeah. It was somebody mentioned the other day while we were hanging out that it was good. He was commenting how it was good for Loren to have another someone repeating his work or sharing his message. And I said, well, it's not Loren's. This is just the way, this is the way that we're designed to be. This is the natural. Yeah. So of course we're going to naturally tune into this way and come back into balance in that space. So I'm just grateful to have another comrade and another ally to help spread this message. And it's been a pleasure getting to know you better. So thank you for that, Loren.
You bet. My pleasure.
Yeah.
Okay, folks. Well, listen, it's been a pleasure spending the time with all of you. Thanks for being here with us and giving us your ears. I'll hope to hear from you. And if I can assist you in any way, I'd be very happy to do that.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Loren. Really appreciate it. And hope everyone has a wonderful day. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions on the topic. And we'll see you next time. So take care, guys.
Bye-bye.